Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, Primer on Legislative Visits with Jery Huntley. My name is Christy Sommerfeld. I'm Regional Services Librarian at the Northern New York Library Network, and we are really pleased to have you here today and thank Jery for being here as well.
And thank you, Christy. I want to almost apologize for suggesting that we keep you on mute, but because there were a large number of people who wanted to be on this call, we thought it would be better if I do my presentation and then we have the questions at the end. So as I talk, if you think of a question, maybe jot it down so you're ready at the end and we don't lose it. I'll go through my presentation, and I admit to including at the end a little ad about a project I'm doing with the Keene Valley Library. But let me start then and tell you who I am and why I'm doing this webinar. The Northern New York Library Network was kind enough to support the project that I'm working on for the Keene Valley Library and knew that I have a background in politics, asked me some questions, and thought it would be relevant for me to do this presentation. And although all you've heard so far is politics and I help a library, I do have an MLS from what we called SUNY then, but is the University at Albany. I was a practicing school librarian and public librarian for a few years, but the family call kind of came. I had worked myself through college in Albany, working at the legislature. I had family in the legislature. And after a few years of being a librarian, I went to work for the Assembly in Albany. I was asked to work for a young assemblyman. I was just a few months older than he was, who had been elected to the Assembly while he was at Harvard Law School. So he was quite young and didn't have any business experience. And we kind of grew up together in politics. His name is Chuck Schumer, and he's been your senator since 1998. After 40 years in DC, when I came here when we won the first congressional seat, I did a variety of things beyond working on the Hill. I lobbied both state and federally on environmental issues focusing on recycling, and I worked on industry issues for a number of years, always keeping my finger in politics, and I've done quite a few campaigns, something I still do as a retiree now, with a focus on politics, with a focus on helping libraries, and with a focus on teaching a course I've taught for years on how to run meetings and deal with difficult people. And I do that for federal agencies. So it's retirement now, and I am honored to be asked to talk about how you should do your legislative visits. Again, hold your questions, and I'll get back to you when I'm done and clarify anything that I may have not been careful about presenting and answer any of your other questions. I'm happy to be on the phone with lots of other librarians as I've come full circle into that work. Now, you see on this first slide, I didn't do the traditional, here's the Capitol. And the reason I didn't just do that is to remind you that most legislative visits happen in the building in the bottom, the Legislative Office Building, and I was one of the first people to work there. The Senate and Assembly chambers are in the Capitol. There are also some offices there, including the governor's, but the Legislative Office Building is focused on offices for each senator and each assembly person. When I was asked to do this, I was asked to prepare you for Library Advocacy Day, to tell you about the legislative players and process and why you should even bother being in contact with legislators, and then do a primer on how you prepare for, conduct, and follow up on those visits. So after you get off this call, you'll know about how an idea can become a law, how to prepare for your advocacy visits, and how to understand that it's really important for you to participate in the legislative process. For your library, for other libraries in New York, for other organizations whose missions you feel part of, and for your daily lives as New Yorkers. I gave a presentation in October at the Northern New York Library Network's conference, and it was totally unrelated to anything legislative, but someone raised a question about how do we do advocacy day? We get intimidated, I get nervous, what do we do? I didn't have time to go back to that person because of what I was focusing on, but it hit me when I heard it. I realized no one should be intimidated if they lobby the legislature. If you prepare, you will feel so good at the end of the day, and you'll reap great benefits for your library. Like most things, have a plan, implement it, follow up on it, and it will be really useful. This is nothing to be scared about. Each legislator was just a person who ended up being aggressive enough and charismatic enough and having some knowledge and knowing how to run a campaign to be sitting there. But in New York State, the senators and members of the assembly have 2-year terms, and they could be out on the street tomorrow, depending upon what you do as New Yorkers. Don't be scared, just prepare. Why bother meeting with them? First, you want to educate, which comes naturally to us as librarians. We want to educate legislators and their staff about what you've achieved in your libraries and what the challenges are. There are still people out there who have this old stereotype of the librarian in the bun with the glasses with books telling kids in the library to be quiet. That's not us these days, as we know. We have new kinds of challenges and the potential for great achievements. And if we don't educate about that, who's going to know? If you meet with legislators, you also have a great opportunity to form coalitions, to establish, or if you have a relationship, strengthen communication at a very personal level with legislative offices, your library, other libraries, and gather other potential allies on missions that you believe in that deal with the legislators. Often people don't realize, because they're reading in the papers, they're watching TV, they're reading on the net, legislating is very people to people thing. If your legislators don't hear what you care about, how do they really know what's important? Giving librarians more of a voice is really important these days, because I think that the role of the library is very misunderstood right now. If you don't talk, how else are they going to hear? Ideas turn into action. Ideas for legislation come from people bumping into a legislator on the street or in the Capitol and just telling their story. From an assembly member or Senate member who has an idea that becomes a piece of legislation. The state official may want to impact something, or an organization may espouse a cause that requires a change in the law. Often one person's idea and how to solve a problem results in legislation that solves the problems of many people. Think about organizations like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, things like that. We really can have an impact. But I want to also make the point that we're not always out there fighting for something. As often as someone is fighting for an idea, they should be looking at other groups and what legislators are doing to make sure that ideas you're against don't move forward. In other words, stopping a piece of legislation from being enacted can be as powerful as supporting one. And most lobbyists are working as much on stopping things as promoting them. So I just wanted to suggest that as insight you be aware of. Here's the basic how a bill becomes a law in New York. An idea comes in the different ways I've suggested. It goes to the Bill Drafting Commission, a nonpartisan group of attorneys who take an idea and put it into formal language that fits into existing law. Then That piece of legislation is dropped into the hopper, as we call it. In other words, it's introduced, it gets a bill number, an assembly number, or a Senate number. It comes in from a legislator coming through the assembly or the Senate. It gets assigned a committee first. So a bill doesn't go right to the floor and get voted on. It's in the right, the idea becomes the right language, it drops into the hopper, it gets a number, and then it gets assigned to a committee for discussion and analysis. A committee like the health committee or the education committee, whatever's relevant. Then the members of that committee vote and determine whether it comes to the assembly or Senate floor. Otherwise, it dies in committee. If a bill has a fiscal impact, if there's money involved, it goes to what's called the Ways and Means Committee, and they have to make a report on the cost of the bill before it continues moving forward. In the same way, if a bill has to do with imposing a criminal penalty or civil sanctions, it goes before the Codes Committee as well. Then the bill starts moving forward. If it started in the assembly, it goes to the assembly floor for a vote. If it started in the Senate, it goes to the Senate floor for a vote. Anything that passes one house goes to the other house for a vote. If both houses pass a bill, then it's sent to the governor for signature. And the governor has three choices: signing a bill, vetoing it, or giving pocket approval, which means they don't sign it, but a number of days elapse, it becomes a law. If it's vetoed, 2/3 of each house have a chance to vote on it again. And if it makes it, then the governor's will is overridden and it becomes a law. So either signed by the governor automatically, pocket approval, or an override. So that's the basic process in New York. Even one constituent contact on a bill can help a legislator decide whether to vote for or against it. And that's why it's important to communicate with your legislators to start. If there's something you're interested in, make sure your local legislators know. When it gets assigned to a committee, you can communicate with the committee chair and other legislators on the committee, even beyond your local ones. Give them your position. If it comes to a vote in the Assembly or the Senate, organize a campaign on that bill. If a bill passes both houses, then you have the governor. So you build that first relationship with your local legislators or a legislator who's interested in a specific issue you care about. And as that bill moves through the process, there are other opportunities to get involved. Make sure you are persistent and you get your views known, and that's how things happen. And when I say contact them, it's so much easier these days. You have many different ways to contact them. You can write a letter, you can phone, you can email, you can visit, you can do all four of them at each step in the process. And you don't have to move anywhere if you don't want. Although I will say, and we're going to start talking about Advocacy Day in a minute, that personal eye-to-eye contact is the most important thing. When you do communicate, know the bill number and its sponsor so that it's easier for that legislative staff to know, hey, I got some people in the district who care about this, and it's bill number such and such, you better read it today. But you don't need to be a constituent as a bill goes through the process. Two things that make a legislator listen more carefully are if you quantify the impact, meaning this will affect this many people of this types of people in this town or this number of towns, having numbers and also making it personal. I don't mean, hey, I'm the librarian in such and I want this to pass. I mean, I'm the librarian in this town and we have this many visitors a year, including this many kids, and it will really change their lives because this many, just make a story so they're seeing a picture of why it personally matters to you and the impact it will have. This communication is especially important because New York, with 150 assembly members, 63 senators, can totally turn over every 2 years. Both houses are up for election every 2 years. And elections are very personal. And so making these contacts, explaining how your district, your library is implemented by a specific piece of legislation or an idea you want to promote can have great impact. And because members get elected every 2 years, you can be a great force, and that's a whole other webinar on how to elect or defeat a specific member. So let's move on to thinking about Advocacy Day. If you're going to visit the legislature, you need a plan. Who's going? What are you talking about? When is it? How are you getting there? Basic components of a plan. To start, list who you want to meet with. Which legislators do you want to see? Get on the internet or get into your reference books and learn about them. They may be your representatives, they may be others who are relevant on a specific committee. Start thinking about what you want to get out of the meeting. Then you make your first contacts. Check when the legislature is in session. Do some talking about several days that they're in session that could work for you, because you're going to have to check a few days. Different things happen different days. Session happens different time. There's budget time when they're not thinking of anything else. Then call or email to make your appointments, trying to get all the appointments you want on the same day. When you call, ask for staff who can arrange a meeting with a member. Get your meetings arranged. There may be a bunch of calls or emails shifting them. When you have things in place, follow up with confirming emails. Get your logistics together. How are you getting there? Who's going together? When are you leaving? Where are you leaving from? Where are you meeting when you get to Albany? Where are you going to have lunch so you don't lose your steam? When you're leaving, where are you meaning to leave? Just those basic things put together as you plan your day. So, what are you going to talk about? Sure, you want to meet the right legislators and their staffs and have that personal contact, but you need to do it in a very professional way. You need to think through, what are 3 or 4 messages that I want to communicate? These messages may be ideas, or they may be specific pieces of legislation that you want to promote or impede the progress on. If it's specific legislation, make sure you have the bill number and the sponsor. And usually it's 3 or 4 messages. As you explain each message, have an ask. This is what I want. As you explain them, make those messages personal. Use anecdotes. Don't just say, I want Senate Bill 122 sponsored by, Mr. Smith to move forward. Say, this would personally impact my library since our book budget has gone down such a percent in the last 5 years, resulting in the fact that we have seen some of our children not be able to get the books that they really need. I don't know, not make up anything, but tell a real story, make it emotional, make it personal, and relate it to the specific thing you're asking for. Have everyone in your group agree. We're focused on these messages, even though some may have other ideas. Stick to the script. And for each of these 3 or 4 messages, Learn everything you can about the issues. Then put together a one pager. On one page, if necessary, a page in the reverse, with bullets, write out your messages, your bill number if there's a bill number, the idea you're trying to promote, and then when you talk it through, again, you're using personal messages, quantifying them, making them real to your library. On this one pager, make sure you have your contact information and distribute it ahead to your group. Then plan the specific meetings. You may all be going together, but you probably want to divide into groups of 3, 4, or 5. Determine one person who's the lead. That lead will make the introductions. That lead will help determine which person talks about which point, making sure that you all have your facts lined up. And then someone leaves the one pager. You should bring a few copies because you don't know how many people will be in the meeting with you. Leaves that one pager because if you just walk in and you smile and you get your picture taken, it's nice. But if you are clear in what your ask is, you tell your anecdotes, you relate them in a personal way, and you leave on a concise piece of paper that looks nice what you're doing, that will sit there and you will have a chance to achieve your objectives. There's personal prep too. Dress in a business-like manner. You're going to be walking, and those floors in the legislative office building in the Capitol are hard. Don't bring extra things to carry that you don't need, or things that will slow you down going through security. Be ready for a lot of walking. There's a lot of walking, and wear the right shoes. You may even ask the first office you're in if they can store your coats to make it easier. Just be ready for a day that has inconveniences. You'll end up waiting a bunch, and it's probably hot in there after you've run quickly to get to your next meeting and then you're told to wait. Just be prepped, be mellow. Be sure your phone is charged so you can call the next office if you need to and say, hey, we're going to be 5 minutes late. So you can find the straggler from your group if you need to call them. Continue with the plans for the day between yourselves. Make a list of who's going with you with their cell phone numbers and make sure everyone in the group has it. If you need to find each other, you don't know what's going on in the Capitol besides what your group is doing, and sometimes it's really crowded and there are demonstrations. You want to be able to stay in touch with each other if you get separated. Leave early. Make sure everyone knows the meeting times and the locations, what you're doing for lunch, when you're leaving, and where you have to meet to leave. Again, because there can be a lot of groups on the same day. And then finally, a week ahead of your trip, could be 2 weeks, remind the legislator's office that you're coming and the time. Remind each other of what you're doing. Distribute that one pager amongst yourselves, the list of cell phone numbers, the schedule with the logistics, and just be all prepared before you go. Then recognize that typically all this changes at the last minute. Just hang in there and communicate with each other and the members' offices you're visiting. Now, you've made your appointments to meet with the legislator. And if you meet with the legislator, that's great. The best case, well, the legislative schedule is constantly changing. There are votes, there are meetings, there are crises, there are other groups that are coming, there are phone calls, there's a lot happening. So you aim to meet with the legislator. There are times that you'll end up meeting with just the staff. Best case, you meet with both. Do not despair if you're only meeting with the staff. You will have made your points. You will have left your one pager. You have a personal contact you can always call again. You've still made progress if you've just met with the staff. But you have a good chance, if you plan this right, of meeting with the legislator as well. When you're in the meeting, be on time and friendly, but be ready to wait. Deliver the messages, be clear about the asks, and try to get commitments on the things you ask for. No matter what happens, be positive. I've been in legislators' offices where I just wanted to strangle them. Everything they represented, everything they said was so against everything I believed with every bone in my body. But I smiled. I made my points. I got the job done. You just stay positive. Stick to the script. Yes, it's fine to schmooze and, my uncle's cousin's brother knows you from such and such a place. You can do some of that stuff, but make sure that you don't do too much of that so that you have time to get your 3 to 4 messages out with your personal messages, with your ask, and a clear commitment for how what you ask will be followed through on. Stick to the script. Another really powerful tool is inviting members to your libraries. That, home visit, they don't forget. The fact that there's a sign out front, welcome Assembly Member Smith, makes them feel good and looks really good in the picture that's in the paper that makes them happy. And being in your library and understanding it from the, you've got these achievements and these needs perspective, being impressed, turning over the stereotype of it's a place of just books and dull, quiet stuff to the incredible libraries we have today is really important. Members of the legislature need to know what we do today and what we can do and how they can help us. Having them physically in your library will really help. An invitation to your library and a follow up on that is important. You finish. Before you leave for home, list anything you need to follow up on, who's doing it, when, any commitments that were made in the meeting on both parties, and sit back for a second and make a quick list. What went well today? What could have been better? So that you can pull that out next time you do advocacy visits and make each time you go more and more efficient. Follow up when you're done. Emails to thank the member, to thank the staff. In each email, include the one pager again. Include your contact information again. Remind about any commitments that have been made. Before I do questions, the promised 1-minute ad. So, as a volunteer, everything I do for libraries is volunteer. I have helped the King Valley Library get grants for their capital campaign. And if you're ever in King Valley, we'd love for you to visit our library. But along with a bunch of other people, we started a project called Adirondack Community, capturing, retaining, and communicating the stories of who we are. I asked you to write down this website, myadirondackstory.org, and please go there and see what it is. We have a unique town. I mean, I often say that since the 1800s, anyone who's ever been famous has been there. And so we have so many people from so many fields of education, literature, religion, art, music, philosophy have come to the Adirondacks, and especially our High Peaks region in the town of Keene. We don't want to lose that history. We also have a year-round population of students who we want to feel proud that they are growing up in this area so that after high school or after college, they come back understanding that our town is really special. And we wanted to not lose the stories and share them, especially with students, in a way that fit the day and time. A website with 3 to 5 minute stories and associated photographs in 8 categories that are community designed in focus groups. We released the website in June with the first stories. We now have 158 stories about our community that are heart-wrenching, funny, beautiful, just incredible. And because this has worked so well for us, we're working to bring similar projects to the Adirondacks, the state, and perhaps beyond. And so I ask you to go to myadirondackstory.org, see what we've done. The last part of the website has a page. If your community wants to know more or is ready to start thinking about doing it, I'm working on a manual and a website to share with communities who want to do their own or even are in the early stages of learning about it. And so I'd appreciate your taking a look at it. So now I'd like to open it up to any questions you've had on anything I've talked about or anything related. And thank you for your patience in listening to me.
Hi, my name is Sue Kowalski. I have a question.
Okay.
Thank you for your information. I'm a school librarian, and I'm planning to bring a group of probably 8 students. And we've gone before, and there are certainly some things every year we try and up our game. Any suggestions from what you've seen that's worked or hasn't worked on what we as a student group should be thinking about?
I think with the student group, it's very similar. It's how a bill becomes a law as a lesson so they understand what happens.
Okay.
The same kind of preparation, including the same thing with the one pager, including having a practice session, if you can, with the students where they each decide to talk about one issue of relevance to them.
Okay.
And then I think they're ready to go. I mean, basically, anything you would do with students is the same thing you would do with any other group. But I would suggest you do a practice session as well. Even some of the basic logistical stuff about what to wear, what to bring, that kind of stuff. You might also warn them to stay off their phones, just the regular stuff we do with kids.
Yep.
But basically, it's the same thing, but be sure they understand the basics of legislation, have that agreement, and have talked about what you're going to talk about and who's doing it, and each have a role in the meeting. Does that help?
It does. I think what usually happens is so many times the questions they're asked are the same low level of almost insulting questions of, well, why do you need, you got Google, and, it's sometimes hard for kids to, the question is low level, so sometimes they get thrown off on how to respond, like the practice. So sometimes we try and practice having the kids take the lead on the conversation as opposed to waiting to be asked, because almost always somebody's going to say, do you still read books anymore? Are there still books on the shelf? Like there's such a disconnect between not everybody, but so many of the folks asking the questions that there's a little bit of taken aback by the students sometimes. So we have to be positively proactive. So we don't, so when somebody says something like, well, why would you need a library if you have Google, that kind of thing, that we're not like deer in a headlight, because it's such a weird question to them sometimes.
So 2 thoughts from that. Number 1, why don't you prepare the answers to those questions?
Yep.
And number 2, when you have this, practice session preparing meeting, why don't you tape them with an iPhone?
Yeah, good idea.
So that they're seeing what the discussion is like and they're thinking more and they're more prepared for it.
That's a great idea. Okay, I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for the question.
Yep.
So, I have a question for those of you on the line, and that is, if you've gone to an advocacy day before, what worked and what didn't work, especially the didn't work, so that we can warn each other about what not to do. So in previous advocacy days, what worked, what didn't work? Any thoughts?
I've got a thought. This is Meg Backus here at the Northern New York Library Network. Jery, thanks so much. This was all really practical and really meshes with what I've seen and experienced at Advocacy Day.
Mhm.
One thing that your question sets me up to offer is that NYLA does a lot of the preparatory work for us, that they print up sort of the set of asks, and they publish the one pager or a one pager or a couple pagers, or they have a room where everyone can put their coats and pick up their packets and like get sort of prepared for the day. But on the point of sort of what's worked and what hasn't is I I think it's important for everybody in sticking to the script. NYLA, this is like a statewide event, and the agenda is being set by NYLA. Or a lot of times the sticking to the script is sticking to what we as a state have agreed is like the important salient points. And I'm curious if anyone else on the call is like, well, I've got my own ideas, because my view is that Advocacy Day is use NYLA's points, and if you've got your own agenda, your own things, that's when you meet sort of outside of Advocacy Day and build the relationships with your representatives or contact the committees that are relevant, whatever. But that on Advocacy Day, I think the idea is that we speak with one voice about these points that the New York Library Association has assembled.
So the Advocacy Day itself is NYLA's day with NYLA's point. And I mean, my first impression is you stick to the messages, but personalize them. Use the meetings to have that first or second contact with the legislator, and then follow some of the things that were suggested to do follow up for your own library or your area. Looking at the NYLA Advocacy Day as the first step in a continuum, bringing it closer to personal and local.
Cool, thanks.
Other thoughts from anyone else on NYLA Advocacy Days and your own interests and what's worked or hasn't worked?
Susan Detremont writes, my question is, how many people are too many on a visit? I am based in Albany, and we are often told that numbers matter, but we often have so many people at our meetings that we can't even meet in the legislators' conference rooms. Obviously, most people don't talk. Is this worthwhile?
So obviously, right. Just there's a limit to the impact of a crowd, and a crowd goes against the make it personal, make it eye contact, say personal stories so they remember you. So my first impression, well, one idea is don't have more than 8 people, but try to schedule a few visits of 8 people each. Make the impact a different way in number of meetings and not number of people you're bringing. Thoughts on that? Crazy idea?
I don't see anything in the chat right now, so.
Yeah, I don't see anything either.
Oh, hi, this is Susan. I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Hi, Susan.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm the one that asked the question. I don't really, because we're based in Albany, we have so many people that can come. So we do hit all our legislators from the region in Advocacy Day. I would say every year we hit them all. So all those meetings are made. But it just sometimes, like, I'm hot, I'm going up and down, like you said in your presentation, and then you get there, and then like you're standing out in the hallway because you can't even fit in. So I didn't know if maybe it would make sense to, like you said, I like the 8 people in a room, maybe have those people report back and have another group of people that would follow up the next week on, as my colleague said, yada, yada, yada.
Exactly. And maybe, your NYLA meeting is in the Legislative Office building, but you make a meeting in the legislators, office on a non-session day because you're there already.
Yeah, because it's easy for us to get there. So that's a good point.
Yeah. Or you attend an event or a speech they're at, and it's less formal, but you do something then.
Okay, so what was that you just said about a speech?
So let's say they're going to the opening of a school in the district or something. You have a few people show up and talk to them, in a more informal way.
Okay, that makes
Go to
sense.
the district offices, and you make an appointment to see them in the Legislative Office building, non-NYLA Advocacy Day, another time.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, and that, I think it's because you're in the area already, it gives you a lot of other opportunities.
Other than the well or for the rally there, is there any other places or other places within the building, not in the offices, where we could be of value for the crowded room scenario?
Not real. I mean, they're in their offices, they're in committee meetings, they're in the legislative chambers. I mean, the lobbyists know that they can wait in the hall and bump into them, but it's really not appropriate for a group to visit like that. Much better to schedule a meeting either in the Legislative Office building, in the home district, or attending an event in the home district. Nothing else in Albany where you could easily corner a legislator is my first impression.
And we, like our legislators, sometimes they know that tons of people show up on Library Advocacy Day, so sometimes they'll actually reserve a room in the building for us to meet at. The all, like Pat Fahey and the other Albany guy, John McDonald, will sometimes do that. But so I guess you could tell them ahead of time that you expect a lot of people.
Yeah, and then just think about a lot of my instructions. I use the word personal and anecdotes a lot. I mean, you get your major messages across in these big groups on the big day when all the librarians are there. But if you follow up with smaller groups in the home offices or in the LOB, setting meetings, you'll get there's more chance that the particular things your library needs can be addressed. So think of Advocacy Day is NYLA's day, but there can be follow-up in district offices or in an Albany trip afterwards. That's more personal to the needs of your library and your community. Anything else that's worked or hasn't worked on your advocacy days or other legislative initiatives?
Anna Dobkowski wrote that she had a tip about she likes to start the meeting with a thank you to the legislator for a previous visit to a library opening or comment about libraries in their newsletter. This shows we appreciate their involvement.
Good idea.
That reminds me of here's a sort of a point of disagreement that maybe you have some insight on. The libraries have been underfunded for the past, over a decade, 12, 13 years. And so there's this frustration that we express too much gratitude for the crumbs that are scraped off the table for us. That there's a question of the being positive thing, I think, is really important, or that registered with me, but also getting commitments that I guess that my question is about whether there's a fine line to keep track of with the thank yous and also the recognition that libraries have dire needs.
It's the fine line between thank you for letting us see you and thank you for getting us $1 million extra. Thanking for seeing me hasn't gotten you anywhere. It's just the start of a relationship. And so that persistent follow-up, being specific with what you want, is what you need to do. along with finding other allies in what you want and having them be persistent in the same way. Of course, you thank a legislator for seeing you, but in that email, thank you for seeing me. Has there been any movement on bill number S232 dealing with such and such that our library specifically needs because, question mark. Could you tell us what the current status is and what you've done to impact it?
Yeah,
Can't
that
make
it makes a lot of
too
sense.
hard, but being very specific about follow up on things you've asked for, follow up on any commitments made.
Thanks. That makes sense.
You can't, second slide, third, whatever it was, don't be intimidated. These people need your votes. It's every 2 years. Politics is so volatile now. Be specific. Never be afraid to ask. Never, you would, I know, never be. Never be afraid to follow up. You can be pushy, but keep your facts. Make sure your facts are right. We can be aggressive. They got to their jobs because they were aggressive. We can be aggressive. We have great needs in the library community. They're not being fulfilled. They're important. We're not just quiet librarians in a quiet environment. There's another question there, isn't?
More of a statement,
Yeah.
Anna.
So Anna said, we also partner up with overlapping groups for a legislator visit to combine as one voice and indirectly show that all libraries work together. And that was what I had put on a slide about. By doing this, you form coalitions, unexpected coalitions and natural coalitions. It's more than one of you asking. You find people to work together. I was working on a bill having to do with government procurement of recycled products and doing something to try to get New York to buy more recycled products in a lobbying initiative going back, over 25 years ago, in the beginning of the recycling movement. And someone said, hey, there's a lobbyist from such and such a bank. We heard that bank recycles the computer paper they use. Maybe it was even more than 25 years ago because computers used paper, stock tip. And they're recycling. Well, environmental groups and banks don't usually lobby together. But I went and met this woman, and they were recycling this large volume of paper you needed to run computers back then. And they became part of my coalition lobbying on recycling issues in Albany. And so finding ways to get other groups to work with you, other libraries, makes you even more powerful. And that's a really good suggestion, combining different groups for legislators visit.
And I would also echo that that it's important for them to see the cross library work that we all do, like academics working with school libraries and all kinds of different partnerships that are in the library world. It's not just all the school librarians going, but that we all work together really well and we need each other. So that's also a point.
I think, as I said in the beginning, most legislators really have the wrong stereotypes about what libraries are and what they do, because we've changed in such wonderful ways. And joining together in unique ways to communicate that, what our achievements and needs are, can be very powerful for you. Any other thoughts on things that work, things that don't work? Any other experience with advocacy days, experiences with legislators that can help others, or any other questions on the presentation? Then Christy, I turn it back to you. And thank you all for staying on.
Great. Thank you, Jery. And thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us and talking about advocacy and legislator visits. And if anyone has any other questions, we can hang out. Otherwise, thanks again and have a great rest of your week.
And thank you all.